I wanted to be a neuroscientist since I was in middle school. I actually read a novel called The Terminal Man by Michael Crichton. It is probably one of his worst books. And in it, it's the hero of the story is a neurosurgeon and like a neuropsychiatrist. And there's these parts in the book where they're doing brain surgery and they're stimulating parts of the brain, motor and sensory cortex in the brain. And the people who are awake, they start like moving their hands or feeling like something brushing on them. And I remember like in seventh grade being like, this is it. This is insane. This is who we are as people is like this thing right now. And so I was like, I want to do this.
Super weird kid. Let me write that down in my notebook. Welcome, Daniel Brady, to the hot seat of the Orita Podcast. Are you excited?
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to eat progressively more spicy chicken wings with every question, because that's what this is, right?
I thought I was doing shots. This is very. we're on very different wavelengths on this one. It is 11 a.m. Hi, everybody. I'm Aaron Schwartz, the best co-CEO at Orita, even if our old head of product, Kyle, got me a mug that said second best co-CEO. It's fine. We do AI segments, but today we're actually maybe going to talk about Orita for the first time on the Orita Podcast, because I have an esteemed guest, doctor, not medical doctor, but student, Dr. Daniel Brady, co-founder, co-CEO, who I'm going to grill for the next hour. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great here as my seat as second place silver medal co-CEO. Definitely last place for sure. Happy to answer any questions that you have.
You're gonna really ruin this podcast. We're going downhill from here. All right. I want to go back and I want you to do a proper intro to yourself. I think I can do it from like our 100 pitch meetings and everything else, but like the real story, like what's your background? What'd you study? And then how'd you get into founding Orita?
Yeah. So my background is I used to be a neuroscientist. So I studied neuroscience as an undergraduate. I then got my PhD at Harvard in neurobiology at Harvard Medical School. My thesis was actually done at Children's Hospital, which was across the street from the medical school. And then I started doing my postdoc at UCSF. And then I decided that I didn't want to be in academia anymore, mainly because it was like too slow. You know, the joke that I always have is that like in my second year of my PhD, I figured out what it was that I was going to work on. And it took me 4 years to keep proving that was true, that main thesis. And so I wanted to do something that was much faster paced. And so I moved to New York City, and a friend of mine was just becoming the CTO of a same-day delivery startup. And he was like, hey, you know how to program, you know a little bit of math, can you help us? And they put me on this project about routing. And I just did a little bit of math and probability theory. I didn't think it was special. I was just like, this is how we would analyze this data, you know, as a scientist. And as soon as I did it for them, they're like, okay, you're our first employee now. And that was actually my walk into the tech world, which was like kind of by accident. I realized that like that kind of skills of like science, stuff like that were not super common in that sort of space. And so there was just like this real need and real hunger. And like that started my startup journey. And I got addicted to the speed and the excitement of all that kind of stuff. And I've been there ever since.
Did you think you would be an academic? Was that like the honest plan or what? Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I didn't even think about an alternative to it. I mean, I wanted to be a neuroscientist since I was in middle school. I actually read a novel called The Terminal Man by Michael Crichton. It is probably one of his worst books. And in it, it's the hero of the story is a neurosurgeon and like a neuropsychiatrist. And there's these parts in the book where they're doing brain surgery and they're stimulating parts of the brain, motor and sensory cortex in the brain. And the people who are awake, they start like moving their hands or feeling like something brushing on them. And I remember like in seventh grade being like, this is it. This is insane. This is who we are as people is like this thing right now. And so I was like, I want to do this. And so I then realized that like the medical part of it, I wasn't actually that interested in, because we don't know how brains code information, all that kind of stuff. Well, so I thought the research part was more interesting, but yeah, that from that age.
Super weird kid. Let me write that in my notebook.
A ton of friends. I'm glad you're really popular.
All right. I'll just keep asking you other questions that we can hold over you in team meetings. All right. So there's like some yada yada where you were like solving hard data problems for a bunch of companies. And then at some point we've another co-founder who's the best of us, Zach. You guys had worked together.
Yes.
Tell me what the founding of Orita was and what you originally thought it was. Was it a consulting business? Was it in search for a SaaS company? Yeah.
So, you know, when Zach and I worked together and then we went to go work at different companies. And at that time, with data science and machine learning, which is like, just a little bit under a decade ago, there are places where data science and machine learning was making it into production. Amazon, Facebook, Uber. And there's a lot of places like the place that we worked at, and they're great places to work at, but like you do all this work and it would end up as prototypes and it would end up being shown in board meetings, and companies would raise $50 million based on like these ideas that they're using. They'd have pictures of us being like Dr. Brady and all this kind of stuff like that, but they would never actually make it because businesses change, because it's complex, because actually serving those models is really, really difficult. And so Zach and I both decided that we wanted to start a company where machine learning was the product that was delivered. It wasn't a nice to have on top of some other primary value. And like now, in the context of like everything being an AI startup, it seems like, of course, it would be the case. But back when we started, it was like, no, you have a same day delivery company. You can use machine learning to make it better, but you can still just have a delivery company. Right. And so we were like, no, we wanted to start a company where the product was machine learning and data science straight off the bat. We didn't know exactly what that was, but like we had helped a bunch of companies in different ways to do that. But we're like, let's consult, build data products, build machine learning products, and see what is a repeatable issue that brands, or at the time we didn't even know if it was going to be for brands or the companies that serve brands would face.
Why were you guys in commerce? Was it just kind of by happenstance because that's where you started? Or like, had you thought about other verticals?
I mean, yeah, we actually had thought about other verticals. And so when we first started, it was like extremely technical. We had applied, there are these things, there's these grants that are given to you by the NSF. If they think that the research is like too out there, like they'll do this for you. We were pretty open to what that would be. We actually went down the line pretty far to write a grant with a hospital to do a bunch of machine learning in terms of helping nurses do their work. And that was actually what we were going to do. But then what happened was that the red tape in order to get access to that information was so long. We were like, we can't exist. Like that space need to be well kept. Like two guys can't wait 9 months for the legal team to clear that sort of thing. Even though like, we had a really good idea and we had all this research in terms of what we wanted to do there. And so we were like, so there was like a couple of like those kind of weird forays where I was like, this is in a slightly different field, but we had known the space. We had known both like logistics and the problems that brands face and all this kind of stuff like that. And so it was just like very natural for us to kind of get more and more focused into commerce. And a few of like of our friends who had worked at commerce tech companies or they had investors in those sort of things kind of knew who we were, and they were like, hey, this brand is suffering from this problem, can you help them out? And like we just kept getting work in that space very quickly.
Got it. And then I actually want to come back to something that we talk a lot about, which is the diversity of
Yeah.
strategies that brands
Oh,
use. But if we stay with this kind of thread, what was the aha when you realized kind of like what Orita could be, or what was the first product you did that was like, oh, actually, this is the thing to productize or to operationalize?
yeah. So when we're hired as consultants, like you kind of come in almost as like a fractional CTO, chief algorithmic officer, or something like that. So we would fix all sorts of things, and like a lot of things that exist now, like CDPs, reverse CDPs, like a lot of those things were like their infancy, or those were only things like Nike would have one, but like a brand wouldn't have their own. And so we would build all of these sorts of things. And so when we first started, it was like our purview was really, really large. And so we would build, these huge reports and business intelligence reporting system tools and having smart algorithms route, direct mail and stuff like that for these brands. And we did it all. And that was actually kind of a problem because we had helped solve so many issues for these brands. It was kind of hard to understand and to focus on which one to do. And we would have this big report where it was just like about customer behavior for these brands, and the brands would build strategies on top of it. And Matt Farring, who's an advisor of ours, who's CEO of
Matt
Farring.
Barr from Fairing.
Yeah,
Matt
Matt
Farr.
Barr from Farring. He was like, you have this great report. It's really, really useful for your brands. But he's like, there's actually this small portion of it. You should actually pretend that that is all you do. And it was about marketing waste. And it was like, even though the algorithms under the hood can serve like 50 different needs, like because you're bought into those companies, you can surface all of that. But if you want to actually sell this, you need to like focus on the one or two that seem to resonate the most. And so even though, as I said, like the algorithm and analytics, none of it changed under the hood, we just rapidly collapsed the messaging just to be like, hey, this is what we do. It's a simple one sentence answer. like one sentence pitch. And that's where we started, which was like, hey, we're going to use ML to make your marketing targeting much smarter.
The first iteration of the product became you're sending 1 million emails a month. If you send 400,000, you'll make the same revenue.
Yes.
We'll take a piece of savings. Is that like where you guys kind of landed?
Yeah, exactly. And the seeds of it were like a couple places. One, we had done the exact same thing for a brand with direct mail, and direct mail is really expensive. So it was like they were sending, 200,000 postcards, but like there were duplicate people in there and people had moved addresses and like all this sort of complicated stuff. And so it's like, oh, you can get that much revenue by sending 100,000 postcards or 75,000 or maybe even a little bit more because there's new pockets that you weren't targeting originally. And that was really, really successful. And then we're like, okay, well, that's an awesome use case, but not every brand uses direct mail, and direct mail can be slow and it takes a long time for the data. Email, there's these great APIs. Everyone uses a tool like Klaviyo. Like we can probably get to the same sort of idea as a hypothesis in this other channel.
So, you and I were introduced by Matt, where I
Yeah.
was going to come in and be an advisor. And I always joke that I was extremely happy at that point in my life. Flexible job, 2 kids. I was advising and consulting. And I distinctly remember one of the first things that happened was you guys had about 10 customers or a dozen customers, and they were paying effectively nothing.
Yeah.
But my aha, when I would talk to like my friends who were in commerce tech or investors, was these guys are obviously onto something because, and I think the example at the time was Caraway. Caraway let them turn on or turn off hundreds of thousands of people in a week and say email or don't email. And it wasn't that Caraway was paying. It was that if DB and Zach were wrong, Caraway would have like foregone a ton of revenue. Right.
Yeah.
And so it was like their willingness to take that risk.
Yeah.
Uh, what made you decide to actually and then we spent some time together. You guys invited me to be a co-founder for, I always think about it as like the software season of the business. So it was like, okay, we have something, let's go build a company. What made you guys decide that this was it? And you actually wanted to like put me to the side, like that you were like, all right, cool. We figured it out.
Yeah.
Or still 100 other problems we could solve. We could do
Oh.
routing. We could build a CDP. We could something.
Yeah.
Like, what pulled you most into saying, I want to build Orita as it's going to become?
It was how rapidly people responded to wanting to talk to us about this problem.
Yeah.
So, we have done all sorts of things and people would take meetings because they had heard about us and because we had solved these other problems. But what happened was that, a friend of mine who ran social media for a couple brands, I was like, hey, Zach and I are trying to do this thing. We're cut email volume, but you'll make us much money. Can you ask a few of your brands if they're interested in that? And he sent it to 6 and 5 responded within 30 minutes to book meetings with us. And the last one didn't because they didn't use Klaviyo. And then all 5 of them, after we had those meetings, became pilot customers right off the bat, like access to Klaviyo just like instantly. And the speed at which that happened, the willingness to like try to do that was so strong that literally that day we changed our website to say that was what we do. Even though we hadn't actually done anything in Klaviyo yet, that we hadn't had any results from that process, we just had known from like what I always told, I always say is like, I didn't know a lot of things, but I think that I would know intuitively what a product market fit pull would feel like. And now you could mess it up in a million ways, but like when you feel it, it's like very obvious. And all of a sudden it was like, here's this pull. There are people who are really busy, immediately responding to us, immediately hopping on calls, immediately giving us access to everything in order to help this problem. This is a real problem that they're facing. And so that was like a really good signal. We changed everything about us, the website, all that kind of stuff. And then 1 month later was when the results came in because we did this big A/B test over that period of time. And when that happened, we thought maybe we'll make things 10% better, 15% better, maybe. We didn't know how much we could improve things. And then it turned out we made things 35% better. And like that was this big efficiency gain. And not only did they like save money and send less and stuff like that, but they actually had more engagement, more clicks over that period of time, which was this concept of deliverability, which we didn't even know that we were stumbling into that. Like that was just like a secondary effect to us. And at that point, Jason from Dell Lashes was like, I've told everyone I know about you. And then that's kind of when it was like, oh, wow. And now we had to like think about price. Like we didn't even think about pricing to that point. And it was like, we'll save you this money. We'll take a quarter of it monthly. And they're like, done. Cool. Sales solved. And then it's like, can you tell people about us? Already told people about it. They'd email us like, hey, I heard you're doing this thing. And like we didn't have any motion, we didn't know anything go to market, we didn't even know what those terms were, but we knew that this was a problem that like people were definitely, it was like definitely top of mind, and they're very interested in hearing more about how it is that we were doing this.
It's really interesting. For those who don't know, a couple months in, we realized, and you kind of made the comment about deliverability, but actually that the models that were saving money were way more effective at finding money. And so the business switched. I mean, it's been 2 years. We still have people who think about us as a cost savings tool, but it hasn't been a cost savings tool for a couple of years. It's been a growth engine. So it is interesting how like you can play with the data and you can go build a product and then you keep unpeeling like what the benefits are. I mean, even your point about the 35% versus the 10% improvement that you expected. I want to step away from Orita for a second.
Sure.
What are the because you've thought about like, hey, where can ML solve a lot of problems? And I want to go down two threads.
Cool.
What are the conditions in which ML is actually useful?
Yeah. Oh, that's
Right.
great.
And then secondly is like, what is ML versus AI? Why are we Orita AI instead of Orita ML? And like, I do want to pull on that thread a little bit and just like, what do you see happening in the AI ecosystem?
Yeah.
But first and foremost, like, I'm a brand or I'm an operator. When do I want to think about ML as like a useful tool?
Yeah. I think it's a really great question. I think there's tools that can help you remove remedial tasks or even slightly complicated tasks, from your plate right now at any size. And that's like something that like, ChatGPT or something like that, like might as well use that if you find that helpful in some sort of where ML, like the sort of stuff that we do starts to really make a difference is fundamentally, it's correlated with becoming larger. It's correlated when you have more and more data through your system. But what is actually the driving factor is that you have a lot of variability in your customer base. That is fundamentally why machine learning works really well, is because up until that point, you can cut your customer base. You can do the same thing to all customers when you're really small. And then you get a little bit bigger and you can be like, I'll do two things to customers at this stage. And then all of a sudden you keep slicing and slicing and slicing because you want to have more performance here. You want to not waste money there. You need to prevent fraud here. Like all of a sudden you're cutting this customer base in a million different ways and you can lose track of it and things drift. You try new things out and everything's drifting. And at that point, it's really your customer base that's really, really different. And so, like Spanx is a customer of ours, like they have people who've been on their email list for over a decade. And then people who signed up 10 seconds ago. And like those are very, very different people at very different parts of their customer journey. And using all or nothing rules, even if you're trying to do analytics, as soon as you do that analytics, it's already starting to be wrong every single second, every day. So you need something that is like actively adapting and becoming smart to that.
Is that Zach rubbing his engine in the
Right. Yeah.
background?
Yeah. I live in New York. So, that's
You're
it.
so cool. We didn't know that already. Um, New York's great, man. Take me back. That's very helpful to think about. What about when should brands be thinking about CDPs? You always teach me when we talk about this, like, what is a CDP good for? Why would you be thinking about it? When is it just like it's too much?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a CDP is a customer data platform, and like what it basically means is like when do you get all of your data together,
Mm.
right? And so um you can have data that's split because in its simplest, you have Shopify doing your transactions and you have a marketing platform. In theory, most brands connect them together, but they don't have to be connected together directly. Um, and then you might use a different platform for SMS and something with ads, and then you have returns data, inventory data, and like eventually it gets to that point, especially if it's centered around marketing, that, and especially the larger and larger that you are, that it just makes sense to have it in something like Snowflake or some sort of like actual proper infrastructure to then build out a bunch of different use cases that you have. Every enterprise company has it. Every single one of them does. I mean, they might have a couple. The question is like, at what point does it make sense for you to do that? And it really depends, I think, fundamentally on like what sort of strategies that you're using. And what I mean by that is that like if you are only on Meta and then maybe you send emails, then you probably don't need that much more unless you're really, really big. But as you get larger and larger and you're using more tools, you're using server side tracking, you're using this, that, and the other, like you're growing your tech stack, you're growing the ways in which you can measure everything that's happening to you, you're using more and more channels. At some point, it gets to a point where like, that even if you connect a bunch of things together, that you're still missing critical parts of the customer journey, that you can't see exactly what Aaron has done. And it's at that point that a CDP is probably worth thinking about.
One of the things we talk a lot about is like if you have a CDP, we need people like you or like
Yeah,
VP to actually like manage the output and make decisions on it.
totally.
Is that a good way to think about this? Like you actually, it's not just having the data in one place, but you need the resources to decide what to do with it.
Yeah, it's definitely the most important thing. Like, is Zach and I have built CDPs for brands, and as soon as we stop working with them, we know that their CDP stop being used. You need, like, the whole point of them is that I mean, there's probably long-standing problems that you want solved that are really helped by having all that connected data,
Mm.
but it's really about, like, having that access to then think and strategize and build stuff out of and be curious about what's in there. And, like, you need a team in order to really manage that. Typically it's a marketing team, and so a lot of the CDPs try to make things easier for marketers so they don't have to, like, know how to program and NoSQL and all this kind of stuff to make it accessible. But, like, you definitely need to have a great team in order to really, really leverage everything that's out of there.
I think the most important question, are we an AI company or an ML company, or how
Yeah.
should I understand that?
Yeah, I mean, we're both. So AI, artificial intelligence, is the superset. It's a much broader picture. Artificial intelligence is basically like anything that seems intelligent.
It's like the pool. We're in the pool.
We're in the big pool.
Yeah.
And then machine learning is probably the most interesting and the most useful subset of artificial intelligence. So in artificial intelligence, like, there's parts of your brain that are just like genetically determined, and they have like these maps and stuff like that. And, like, it's technically artificial intelligence because it's the way that the brain does something, and you can have a circuit do something similar. Machine learning is a very specific, powerful subset of it, where you don't have a known set of rules or weights to learn. Like, you have to learn it. And so, and the way that you learn that is through experience. And that is a key thing. That's the learning part of machine learning, is like, how do you, when you don't know exactly what to do, can be fed experience over and over and over again to sharpen the way in which you do something so that you're better and better at it.
So that's like the unicorn floaty.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, got it. In the pool of AI. It is really interesting to think about. One of the topics that you and I keep bumping into is the idea of like, if you're Nike, you have all the data in the world and
Yep.
you have all the resources to have 100 DB and Zacks, right? And ML engineers, but you've only seen a single strategy. Can you kind of expand on what you were just talking about with experiences to talk
Yeah.
about like why actually building this, maybe as we're doing, but just you can abstract away from Orita just generically when
Yeah.
ML makes sense? Yeah.
I think the thing is that, like, I think that there's a lot of emphasis on data and unique data capture and stuff like that, which what I mean by that is that, like, if you talk to VCs and investors, will be like, "Oh, what's your specific data about? How do people not have access data?" Or, like, you somehow get data across all these different sources, and that's really, really powerful. And it's like that's true up to a point. Like, that's, I mean, that's definitely true. But it's not the only thing that matters. Is, like, having all that information is the first step to it. And if you have a unique advantage to it, that's a really good thing. And so the first part is, like, as soon as you're not at Nike, you have a little bit more information, you already have a view that's outside of it, which is like, and to think about this in a non-machine learning perspective, it's why experience is so important. It's why people have multiple jobs. That if you're a great marketer, has probably been a great marketer at several companies, and they've seen marketing work at Adidas, and they've seen marketing work at Nike, and they've seen, and, like, it's those shifts in those strategies and underlying data that make it better. Like, they don't just, like, copy exactly everything that they did from one place to another. They learn that, like, because of this branding, because of this, that, and the other, like, I'm going to adapt to this. The way the company has done this historically, and they gather all that experience and become like a world-class marketer in that way. Machine learning is, like, very similar. So if you think about it in terms of not only the data that's under the hood, but then how has that data been acted upon? Because all of this is a system. We're not passive, right? Like, you're making decisions on who to reach out to, and seeing how they respond to those decisions. And so it's not just the underlying data that's there. It's like, what is the strategies and the set of strategies that have been used to it? So Nike is an example. Nike, obviously, phenomenal at marketing, right? But people at Nike, especially if they've only worked at Nike, haven't seen what it's like to work at 100 other great companies or 1,000 other great companies. A company who emails people every day, who emails people once a month. And that once a month is a newsletter about their topic. It's not even trying to sell them something. Like, they don't know the boundaries of what these channels are able to do just from the nature of where they're sit.
It's really interesting. It's fun to hear you break down what the actual problem set is. The thing that we've been doing for the last couple of years is free audits for
Yeah.
every brand. And for me, on like the go-to-market side of the house, I love it because it is a excuse to be like, hey, let me give you something. And then I'm gonna sucker you in to have a conversation with me. Right. But the give has to be useful, right? It's not
Mhm.
like, oh, here's a drawing, right? It's actually like, here's some insights about your business that you may not need to see. But the flip side is I imagine from the like ML side,
Yeah.
I know we will reject brands and be like, hey, you don't have enough data, or you don't have enough history. Was the original idea for the audit actually to like truly go build out and figure out like where there's enough leverage to make it worth serving the brand?
Yeah.
Or yeah, how did you guys think about that?
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. Because, I think the thing is that, like, for example, if there's a brand who sends one email a week and their click rate is 1% and they email everybody and their revenue's off the chart, it's like there's
Mm,
very little to work there,
yeah.
right? They've figured out for now what they should be doing. And there's a lot of other companies who, don't have enough information about their users or about their system in order for machine learning to really make a difference besides like them quickly reacting and using kind of intuition and their intelligence, their experience in order to help make those decisions. There's this point at which that gap grows. Once again, the customer base is both valuable enough and varied enough
Mhm.
that you yourself cannot basically like hold on to the reins all the time. And the purpose of the audit is to uncover those opportunities, and opportunities in both directions. Like, are you not messaging right now that it makes sense to? And they fell through the cracks because, you know, they haven't visited your website in 6 months, right? And if you extended that to 3/4 of a year, you'd end up in spam, right? But
Yeah.
there's these 50 people who exhibit this kind of longer tail behavior that makes total sense to reach out to them. Machine learning algorithms don't have to follow these all or nothing rules. They can go out and find those
Mm.
people and present them. And then there's the other ones which are like, I'm optimizing for this. I'm optimizing for opens for this and the other. And it's like, okay, but this person has clicked once in 6 months or whatever. And given the way in which your list interacts with each other, that's actually a really, really weak signal. And it's risking the entire program having them there at this moment in time.
I like that. The framing I always think about, just to like, I always give silly illustrative examples, is if you do a 90-day engaged audience, what you're telling me is that somebody who clicked 89 days ago is worth everything and somebody who clicked 91 is worth nothing. And so it's kind of like, how do you go break those rules? Um, how do you think
Well,
about
and actually
who,
one thing, the framing that I like to think about in this sort of thing is that the engagement rules that most brands use today is that someone who did something recently is going to do something again. And so like for example, they'll have a rule, I'll be very, very tight. Last 7 days, they visit the website or clicked an email. That's an extremely high performing segment for most brands. And they'll be like, I'm going to email them every day because and what is the thesis there? They clicked or they visited the website in the last 7 days. That's who I think should be emailed now.
Mm.
Our algorithms are a different thing. It's trying to predict who's going to be in L7 if you email them today. Not that they already are in it. We're trying to predict who, if you email them, will end up into that segment. And if you do that, it's not only going to be the people who interacted in the last 7 days, it's people who you have signal that like these are going to interact with the brand if you email them.
I like it. I'm thinking about a specific customer that is churned that I'm not going to talk about. But that is like, yeah, you guys didn't do anything. And I distinctly remember like presenting the chart of how many customers that hadn't purchased from them in 2 years that we brought back.
Yeah.
And it was like way more than the year ago, right? So relative period. And more importantly, how many at bats we were creating, about how many clicks and whatever. And I think at some point it's like the challenge for a business like this, and we've had this challenge probably from day one, is we can go as deep into any data analysis as you want.
Yeah.
The question is, what analysis do you want?
Yeah.
Or is it going to be a moving goalpost of like, yeah, I don't believe it.
Totally.
And then the answer is like, well, do you want to hold out? Do you want, like, how do you actually want to solve that? I'm actually, um, you are much cooler. You're a cucumber. Sorry, I don't mean like I'm cooler, but like, like
Yeah. Yeah.
when it's, when it's happening. Where do you find yourself, like, when you're even interacting with me, let alone with customers, and people are like asking you questions that are like so self-evident to you on a data side? How do you think about like translating everything that you know and that you see in statistical significance, which is like,
Yeah.
hey guys, like this is what Meta is doing in the background. Like we are bringing you
Yeah.
pristine, best in class data science, machine learning, like theory. How do you break it down for Luddites, for liberal arts people, for the
Yeah.
marketing
Uh,
managers, like for the me's of the world?
I think this is the biggest part of my own journey and experience here is just like, I think when we first started and we had all these like statistical tests and all this kind of stuff and we didn't care about people's attribution rules, we're just like, this is how you solve it. And it's because it's like all of our deep training is about this and we understand that. But at the end of the day, what really matters is that people are using you to make big, potentially huge strategic decisions that can have a huge monetary effect on the nature of their business. And in that case, statistical tests can be part of that story, but it's really a story. It's you have to build a case, almost like an evidentiary case, like you're going to trial on like what is the thesis here? Why is this going to work? And then like after you do it, why did it work? Why did it not work? Where is there room for improvement or like room to double down in? And in that context, like it's not there's not a single answer in terms of like, oh yeah, this is going to work for every single customer because like oftentimes there's almost like an emotional component of like being like, hey, like this means that like we're going to have to fundamentally treat this channel in a different way or treat our customer base in a different way. Like, what is the evidence that I need in order for me to get there? And that can be sometimes done because like you do work in phases. Hey, we know for a fact that our algorithms really perform it, but we oftentimes suggest to our brands like try this in an additive way at first. Just see what we look like on the edges. And then as you get more and more confidence in that, you can like think about using us more and more exclusively.
Do you have any customer experiences that you can think about, like that you want to bring up about like where there was a brand that was a complete doubter? You don't need to say who the brand was, but how you kind of broke through on the story side or like help them understand the impact that we were driving.
Yeah, I think there's a couple different ways that come to mind. I think that like let's take the example. I can come up with a couple different couple examples of like not emailing people because they're not engaged. That's a very scary thing for a brand to do, right? Because they've been doing it for a long time and they are really worried that they're going to lose out on revenue to in order.
So like a brand that emails a lot of people and you're like, guys, email 30% fewer and they go, no chance.
Yeah, no chance.
That is
Exactly.
scary.
That's an extremely scary thing to do. And so like and the truth is that like is that the ways in which brands can be comfortable with trying and testing out that strategy are very different. So for example, with some of our brands we do straight up A/B testing and that works very well for some of them, not very well for all of them, but like it's really important to understand where that works, which is like, hey, we're going to turn these people off. We're going to measure them at some point in time and we'll show you that like it's not like they're going to generate $0. It's just that they won't generate any dollar differences than those that you can continue emailing. And that works well for a lot of brands, but it doesn't necessarily work for others. We also have this thing called a scenario planner, which is like you can play with our engagement segments and you can see like what does it mean if I email these people and I don't email those. And what was really interesting about that context is that like, we have, this great CRM manager who's been trying to convince his boss for a year to not email the bottom part of his list and is extremely data driven, built all this stuff in Looker. Hey, I don't want to email the bottom list. They're actually, it's a risk for our deliverability. They're not making any money. And so we had the scenario planner, which is like literally shows like, oh, if I add this segment and I take away this one, my click rate changes here, my revenue changes over there. And within 30 minutes, the marketing, his boss was like, oh, yeah, we should clearly not email these people anymore. And then they went on. And so then they built a plan of like, I'm going to hit my top Orita segments this time with this frequency. And they totally crushed their goals. And so like, they're extremely happy with the way in which email is performing. But it took that kind of like wargaming scenario to like actually see those inputs change as you play with them that really helped them drive to that answer.
What is, I mean, we're moving multi-channel, right? We
Yeah.
do SMS with Klaviyo. We do direct mail. We partner with Postpilot. We're building an ads product. What are you, what is exciting to you about moving multi-channel? Not from the customer perspective. Like obviously, if we're great at email, we can go help them make the most out of their list and other channels. That's cool. But what about from an ML perspective or from a data perspective? What do you find compelling there?
I think what's really interesting is to think about how we can make all of this orchestration so much smarter. And I think that like it was very interesting going through strategies, even within the same company, is that they'll have different strategies across different channels and they will not overlap or try them in other ways. And like, here's a good example. They'll become extremely sophisticated with email and they blast their SMS list every single week. And the concept of like texting people twice, some people twice a week and some people not at all. It's just like, nope, this is what we do here. but I have 500 email segments in order to like wrap myself around this sort of stuff. And then you get to things like Meta and direct mail, and it's like all of that kind of stuff. It's, the way that I joke about it, but it's also kind of true, is that like most email marketing strategies are a combination of last month and this time last year. And there's not a real exploration on what is possible within and across all these channels. And so the thing about having a flexible layer that can kind of like index in and out of these as we work more and more with our customers is to really kind of explore what is effective in that space for them in a way that like they're comfortable with, in a way that allows them to make sure they don't overspend money and they don't lose out on email. Like, how can you do all of that sort of stuff to get to some sort of optimal set of answers for them as soon as possible?
Thanks. Kind of a random one, but I'm curious, like you've done the analysis for all of our customers, you've kind of looked through everything. Are there any like metrics that you expected to really hum that just don't when they hit a customer? Like any metrics that or analyses that we've done that have surprised you and like just how effective they have been to help customers understand the impact we've driven?
Yeah, I mean, so I think so it's very interesting. I think that there is a big gap in terms of like if they really know email very well, then what they know that they really have to care about are clicks, because clicks are the part of the funnel that they can kind of control, and that drives everything else down there. That if you have a high click rate and you have high clicks, that even if that means like today I didn't get that conversion, that is a sign of a really healthy system, right? And that is going to mean there's going to be all this at bats, qualified at bats that are flowing through your funnel. And so like the key is to find when do people like understand that that is like actually one of the things to really think about and optimize for. And so those are things that I think that, even though people say are important, I think that people actually understate how important those sorts of things are. I think what people overstate is important is definitely even earlier in the funnel, which is like our opens. I think that people optimize for those as opposed to the way that we don't optimize for those at all, but we do use those as inputs to predict downstream behavior, but we don't use them to actually try to optimize for, because they're just so correlated with sends. They're not correlated with downstream behavior. They're correlated with you messaging people, not people converting.
We should probably update the audit to show clicks, not click rate. As you're saying this, it's pretty interesting because this aligns with what you were talking about earlier, which is, we're not trying to tell you what to do with the person who clicked in the last 7 days. We're trying to get you the next person to quote unquote click in the last 7 days, right? And
Yeah.
kind of increase more at bats. And I think people focus on click rates and we talk about click rates, but one of my caveats is always like, I can game click rate. We can shrink your list extremely small. But at the end of the day, that the job to be done is not to increase a click rate. The job to be done is to increase revenue. And the real determinant of revenue, again, holding merchandising consistent, creative consistent, everything
Yeah.
else is at bats, which is like clicks. And do people click
Yeah.
and engage there?
I mean, I totally agree. The one qualified statement I'll have is what I would call, and this is the hardest part, is like qualified
Yeah.
clicks, qualified activity, because obviously you could have bots and you can, or just like people that aren't going
Yeah.
to do anything. And so that's why the whole funnel has to be analyzed. You can get a bunch of site traffic, right? You can,
Sure.
but like, is it going to be site traffic that converts is like the really big, is a really big thing. So that it's just like,
Yeah.
how can you make sure that like, and the thing is that once you start getting better and better leads, once it's like qualified clicks and qualified active on sites, then it's actually much easier to figure out what levers work downstream.
Yeah.
If you're sending great people to your website, you can figure out what CRO stuff to optimize because it will actually make a difference.
Yeah. I like it. Yeah. Do you get X discount? I get Y discount. You get a lifestyle image, or I get product image. You get a abandoned cart flow 6 hours later or 12 hours later or 2 days later. Yeah. Okay. I follow. It is interesting as well because like two of the other things that have kind of popped up like as features almost, but they all fit within the framework of Orita email, um, is bot detection, which
Yeah.
we are not like the world's foremost bot company, but we find a lot of different bots.
Yeah.
I'm curious if you can like just share a second on that. And then secondly, brands who have cleaned their lists, we find an insane amount of revenue for
Yeah.
them. Like I always talk about it, don't clean your list, optimize your list. Like there is a lot of gold sitting from what you thought of were dead contacts.
Yeah.
Maybe talk about bots and then I'll jump in on the second one.
Yeah. For the bot stuff, I mean, this is also kind of an area that we stumbled into. Basically, our some of our customers started complaining that like they notice this thing, they're having this weird checkout problems, and they still use tools to validate email addresses and stuff like that. But and there are things that seem like they're valid email addresses, but the activity is unusual. That is can be a sign of like what are called list bombing attacks. It can be like Google shopping stings. It could be alias. There's all sorts of different categories of these sorts of things. But basically, when they pop up, they can really skew stuff. They, at the worst case, they can sink your deliverability. They can mark you unsubscribe. They can mark you as spam, and that's absolutely the worst case scenario. And other scenarios, they could just like throw all your metrics off. All of a sudden, you are sending what you think are great emails, but no one's buying, or this and the other. And it kind of messes up your entire way of understanding that sort of stuff. And so, what we do is we make detectors whenever we hear of a problem from a brand, we make a detector for it. We then see who else in our system is suffering from that, kind of like an antivirus software sort of perspective, to then, suppress and eliminate those bots as soon as they come in.
I feel like that's the only part of being an Orita customer where you actually get a proper network effect, right? Like we're not sharing PII and like we might have seen you across 30 of our brands, but it's not like we tell the next brand that we've seen DB and here's the discount he wants or anything. But it is like we find the anomalous behavior. If we can programmatically remove it, we do it. Yeah, the manually suppressed, just to like kind of cut to the chase on that one, I think is very similar of brands might have a million profiles that they've cleaned over time. And maybe 2% of those profiles are really active, but they don't reactivate them ever. And the models that you and Zach have built are very good at, again, not just like, she's on the site today, but predicting what is the right time to add somebody back into email to hopefully drive that click to bring them back in the funnel. I want to switch gears because we got about 10 minutes left.
Great.
And I want to talk about things that scare you.
Okay.
What's hard about doing this, right? Like you didn't come in, you came in from academics and then you moved in to run data science teams, but now you're like founder, CEO. Like what is the hardest part for you? What has been maybe like surprisingly easier than you expected? I don't know, just talk a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you're responsible, and you and I together are responsible for an entire company, not a machine learning algorithm, right? Or set of machine learning algorithms. And so the hardest thing is to understand that balance, especially given like what naturally interests and excite me. It's just like, oh, I'm going to be on a bunch of sales calls this week, and I actually like being in part of them. And like where I'm most needed is here or there, and like that balance and those forces, because everyone wants your input, everyone wants help from what you're doing. To really be very ruthless, not ruthless, but like to be very thoughtful about like where you're spending your time and your effort, and like giving yourself time to think about things to make sure that you can think about things from the big picture. I think all of that is the hardest, because like, there's many times when I just, it's like, oh, the garage band days, which me and Zach just like, let's make this algorithm like solve this problem. Like that's really exciting. And I always love those conversations, but it's just kind of like, but what is the product experience to this? And how's the pricing going to do this? And how do we like enable our partnerships manager in order to how she can talk about us, in a non-technical way to our agencies as a third party, like all of that sort of stuff, is both exciting, but also a huge challenge. I mean, it's a difference between being a machine learning engineer and running a company is essentially the hard part.
How do you find, do you have any tips for founders or for operators around like finding balance or like, being able to handle that pressure and work hard, but also just like survive for long enough that, right, you can go build the company?
I mean, that's really, at the end of the day, that's like really the primary thing is to survive long enough, especially if you've road tested your vision a bit before and you kind of understand and you think you have a good sense of like where everything is going. Then the thing is that you could be 100% right there, but if you don't live long enough to see that vision, then it doesn't really matter. And so, like there's like, of course it's like exercising, eating well, making sure you have hobbies, all of that sort of stuff. It's really easy to have those things kind of fade from your life, but it's like to be really balanced about that kind of stuff. And I think the other thing too is just like finding great people to help build this with you, because you need people who are really, really great at things that you didn't even know existed. I didn't know what partnerships was 2.5 years ago. I didn't know what that concept was. It is our go-to-market strategy now. I had to learn the existence of this thing. Then I had to find, then you were like, hey, we should focus on this. And then we're going to hire someone into this sort of thing. And all of a sudden it's just like, I now know about this function, and now it's like responsible for how we're going to grow and all this kind of stuff like that. And so like, you're always finding those sorts of things. And so like being able to find really good people who you think are going to take you to the next level, and each of those functions is also super critical.
Are you happier when I am stressed and don't sleep, so therefore work a lot and call you? Or are you happier when I'm healthy and you don't get phone calls with me?
I think the happiness is okay. Like in surfing, the best time to surf is when the tide starts to change. And so I neither bottom Aaron or top Aaron are the great. It's either the descent or or when you're coming back up. When you're in the low place and then all of a sudden the calls start to get less, but it's still a nice number of calls, that's great. If there's no calls from Aaron, then I'm like, what's going on? What's happening? So it's the change. That's what I like. It's the bipolar part.
Okay. This is a stupid question. I'm going to edit this out. Nobody's ever going to hear this answer again. We don't have much time left. I don't know what to ask you. I think, let me ask you like one random one about
Yeah.
what's happening with, if you've heard about artificial intelligence, what is happening with inboxes and how should brands be thinking about like getting ahead of AI summaries? And we specifically don't get involved with content. We're
Yeah.
very, very good at telling you who wants to hear from you and who doesn't. And
Yeah.
the magic is like you add that to the brilliance of the brand or the agency or whoever's doing the creative and knows the customer base. And you actually like go get the right list of people to message on a daily basis.
Yeah.
But how, as you're thinking about building our product to be more robust, are you like you and Zach and already in the team, right? Our engineering or product org, like going to build product knowing how dynamic the world is and how
Yeah.
quickly things are changing.
I mean, I think AI summaries I think is obviously very interesting. I mean, I think what's fascinating is now like the promotions tab, at least for me, is ordered by most relevant, not by date
Mm.
anymore. And so like if you think about the context of like everything that we talk about, that single difference there is going to be the reason why revenue falls or rises for a lot of brands. Because like, I say like, oh, I have like 5 unread messages here, and sometimes I have to scroll for a really long time because Gmail deemed it not relevant to me, right? Even though they just emailed me. And so
Right.
thinking about like being very thoughtful once again about like who's open to your messages and listening is like going to be even more important. And the signals that are read as inputs to that, are they opening? Are they clicking? Like how important those things are and how valuable they are going to change relatively. But like we still know at the end of the day, like what is the goal? The goal is like that you send in these messages that they then go to your website for an app that to then convert or go to your physical store to convert. And like it will just be like the relative weighting of different parts of that journey that are really going to change um because maybe there'll be less opens or maybe there'll be less clicks because of the AI summaries and whatever, but like you can still totally if the content that you're sending out is working.
And so if I'm like interpreting stuff that we, haven't talked about just now, but just generally think about is like the idea of building our models in the way we have is that like the world's going to change and like
Yeah.
it's not we put our thumb on the scale per brand. You actually build a model that is dynamic, that is
Yeah.
durable no matter. Okay.
Yeah. And for our perspective, there'll be a point at which, we retrain again and retrain again and retrain again and retrain again. And all of a sudden we'll compare that training versus what it was, 4 years ago. And be like, oh, wow. Like a lot of these features are more relevant. A lot of these features are less relevant, but that's the whole point of having a flexible model
And it
that you
might
can.
be like there's new channels that pop up or
Oh,
like the way,
100%.
forget even just the waiting. There's different
Yeah,
data points that show up
absolutely.
that you couldn't project it out. Okay. I got it. All
Yeah.
right. Last actual tactical thing. I struggle and I would love for you to explain to me in very simplistic terms with the discussion around what does being in spam mean? And could you land in the inbox and still have nobody see you versus like when people talk about deliverability
Yeah.
and like, yeah, just
Okay.
talk at me for a
Yeah.
minute.
Okay. So there are several different layers. And so we'll go from the worst to the best. At the very worst is that your email is outright rejected from the server explicitly. You're told no. That in for a lot of consumer inboxes is like not a really common thing, but in the B2B world it happens all the time. Like you just cannot send a message to
It's because you've sent 10,000, nobody's clicked once, and Gmail's like, you're not a good
like
sender.
you're
You're not
operating.
even getting into the server.
This IP address is really, really weird. It's a very bad actor, like all this kind of stuff,
Yeah.
straight up rejected. There could also be either silent failure, so it passes and it either doesn't go through or it takes a really, really long time to be delivered. That's like this weird in between world where like I send an email, but and you should have received it a second ago, but it actually gets delivered 2 hours later. That's like this other weird slowing process if you have bad behavior.
Hmm.
And that's still just at the server level. Then when you get to the inbox, there's obviously spam, right? And that's like a special corned off section that one checks essentially, right? And that is a place where most messages actually get rejected by servers. And then the next very common section is that they end up in that spam section. And something around like 80 to 85% of emails sent globally are spam. So the default assumption for any bulk sender is that it's spam. That is the default assumption from any inbox provider. And so what you have to do is you have to prove that you're not spam.
Mm.
And the way that you prove that is that you have a new IP address, you have to quote unquote warm it up.
Mm.
And the concept of warming up is like you send 10 great messages and you send 100 and people click on, people don't mark you as spam. And the reason why they do that is because the default assumption is that at the start you are spam.
But when we are talking to brands and they talk about
Yep.
we have good inbox placement, but we can see their click rate is like
I see.
23. The reality is like they have inbox placement, which they are not in the first 85%, but the likely scenarios they're not primary, not promotions, but they're in the spam that people can see. Is that the right way to think through it?
Yeah, they're in the spam part, like in Gmail. If you click a bunch of buttons, you can get into your spam.
Mm.
They could potentially and it's not an even distribution. It's very rare that every single message that a brand sends is to spam. It can happen if you're really,
Yep.
really bad, but it could just be like half your messages land up in spam for
Yep.
Gmail or something like that. And so you should always think about it as a distribution, and that you want to bias the distribution to be as many in the inbox, then promotions, then spam. And so the 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 thing about it is that like people use a lot of inbox tools and stuff like that to understand it. And the way that I always frame it is that like if those tools tell you that you're in spam, you're in spam. If those tools tell you that you're not in spam, you don't know. So that's the way to think about it, is that like the way that you can tell if you have great inbox placement is great performance. And that's like both click rate, people are visiting the website, people are buying from you. If you're emailing every single person and you're like, yeah, but I did the C test 2 years ago and like we're in the inbox, buddy. And it's like, yeah, but your click rate is 0%. Like that means like no one is actually really doing it, assuming that your clicks work and stuff like that. But yeah.
Daniel, I promised you 20 minutes of gotcha questions on me, but unfortunately we're out of time. So you can just say one nice thing. I do have so many more questions, but I guess I'll have to ask you one-on-one another day. Thank you for taking the time. Thanks for walking through this. Is there any like last bit of wisdom you want to share? Anything, any insights you want to share with a brand owner?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the major insight people often ask me because of my background is, the interest in like things that are like agentic this and LM that, and like where do all these sorts of things fit? And what I always say is that like what is it's hilarious that this is even considered like old ML because it's not old, but like what's considered like algorithmic machine learning, which is the sort of stuff that we do with smarter targeting and stuff like that. Like LLM and foundational model systems cannot do that. They can't do that well. Those sorts of things, those they're like language models. And of course, like things like ChatGPT and stuff like that have some reinforcement learning aspects of it, but they haven't been trained specifically on the sorts of things that something like targeting, you really need to have precision to do it for. And it's because the data is unavailable, but also the problem set is completely different. And I think the hard thing is that in these systems that have language models, they quote unquote, they literally say they can do it. You can type in like, help me target this thing. And it's not like Claude's going to say no. It's going to be like, yeah, this is what you should do. But there's no actual data backed answer that is really what's right for your brand. It's just hallucinating based on thousands of blog posts that it read that this is like the right thing to do. And so I think you have to like ask that question if you're looking for tools, looking for help. Like they don't have to reveal state secrets, but it's just like roughly what sort of what sort of tools are being used to determine the output of that sort of stuff. And if it's just like, oh, it's AI this, AI that, like that's not good enough. It's like, what is the sort of way in which they're actually attacking this problem? And there's lots of different algorithms that can serve that, but like that is the primary question that you need to ask in order to see if something is useful or not.
That's great. Thanks, man. Appreciate your time today.
For sure.
Hi, I'm Aaron Schwartz, co-founder and co-CEO of Orita.ai. We build AI customer segmentation for some of Klaviyo's biggest brands like Oriana, Spanx, Caraway, Third Love, True Classic, Rem Beauty, and on and on. Brands come to us to help find untapped revenue, improve their click rate, drive away mean bots, and a bunch more. You can learn more or get a free customer engagement audit at Orita.ai.